What's going on, guys? Dan Watson, Learning Cameras, and the Sony A9 is here and ready to compete with cameras like the Canon 1DX and Nikon D5. Now with 24 megapixel sensor, 20 frames per second shooting, fully silent mode, 693 phase detection autofocus points covering 93% of the frame. On paper, it really seems like this camera is ready to do that. But as we often find with Sony cameras, there's a lot more to the camera than what you see on the spec sheet. Now, I did want to preface this. We were able to shoot a variety of situations, and we shot about 2,500 images as well as a bunch of video with this camera. But it amounted to about 8 hours of hands-on time with the camera, which is a little bit less than what I would like for a full review. Also, we still don't have RAW support from Adobe Lightroom since the camera isn't actually out at the recording of this review. So we're gonna update this with the full review. So what I want you to do is check out the description below. There will be links when that is available, but most importantly, I'm gonna make all the JPEG files and later the RAW files from all of these pictures that you're gonna see available for you to download the full resolution file. So check out the description below. All that is going to be there, and you can support us by using those links whenever you make purchases for your camera. I really appreciate you doing. So let's take a look at this camera and see what it's able to offer.
Hi guys, I'm Sally Watson, and as a wedding photographer, shooting with the Sony A9 was absolutely incredible, and I wanted to show the benefits that I saw. First thing I noticed that I absolutely love, this is a dream come true for a wedding photographer and a newborn photographer, is the silent shutter. The fact that I can shoot 20 frames per second with a silent shutter in a wedding ceremony, especially even Catholic churches. Catholic churches tend to want more quiet, more off to the side photographers. That is a huge advantage. Or being right in the middle of a newborn session and being able to get right up next to the newborn and not creating that noise that is a distraction. The second thing was the focus tracking. Focus tracking on that was incredibly perfect. There were a few times, I think I noticed maybe even 2 times out of shooting with it for almost 10 hours we shot with it, where I noticed it would focus on the runner's foot or something running towards me, but every single time it nailed it. That is huge. With, even with portraits, with a jumping shot with a wedding party, or a moving bride towards me that's coming a little bit fast, that's maybe a little bit nervous. That was insane to me. Third thing that I absolutely loved was no blackout. It is distracting to me as a photographer that when I'm in a portrait session, when I'm in a wedding, I can look through my viewfinder, and then I got to pull down my camera to look at my picture. The fact that I can look at my pictures as I'm taking them is a massive advantage to a wedding photographer, to somebody who is on a time crunch, to somebody that is trying to make somebody comfortable in front of the camera. I could just continually shoot, and hey, at 20 frames per second, that's pretty cool. Another huge advantage to me is all the custom buttons. Coming from a camera that doesn't have as many custom buttons, it is nice to be able to not go through my menu systems constantly. Hey, I want to change this or this or this, and I absolutely love that. One of the biggest advantages to me is the in-body stabilization. I shoot a lot with prime lenses, at weddings, at portraits, at newborn, and the fact that I can shoot at a lower shutter speed and my image will come out stabilized is pretty awesome. That's a massive advantage to somebody like me that tends to shoot in more dark places where I can't control the light. I do absolutely love my prime lenses, and I'm thankful I'll be able to use them now with Sony A9's image stabilization. I'm definitely looking forward to getting the Sony A9 back in my hands just so I can test the raw capability in low light. My advantages definitely outweigh the disadvantages, and the question is, would I actually purchase it to be my camera for weddings? Absolutely, I would. It is a wonderful performing camera. It absolutely delivers. The price To me, definitely is a lot more. That is $1,000 more than what I'm using right now, but I definitely think it's worth it.
Now the Sony A9 does look and feel a lot like the A7R Mark II, which you can check out in this review. And you know, that's a good thing for the most part. It's a great camera. We do have a new drive dial for your autofocus settings as well as your regular drive modes. And now both of these do have a lock on them, and I will say that the autofocus settings, the lock to unlock that is a little bit difficult to use with one hand, and I just wish that it wasn't there altogether. I didn't find it needed. We do have 2 card slots now, and that's a great thing. One of them is UHS 2, not the other one. So that means if you're going to be shooting some high-speed shooting, you're only really going to want to shoot your RAW files to that one card, because if you're doing a duplicate backup to both cards, one of them is going to slow down your system if you're using those UHS 2 cards. We also have a touchscreen, and I will say that the touchscreen is very similar to the A6500. So it does work, but it's a little bit of lag on there. Not my favorite implementation at all. It is a little bit smaller than what you would get from your high-end cameras. It's only 3 inches. It does have articulation, which a lot of the others do not have, but most of those are going to be a little bit larger screens. And again, you're only going to get touch autofocus, and it isn't the best system on the market. Now we do have a brand new battery for this camera, and I will say it lasted a lot longer. We shot 6 to 8 hours, over 2,500 images, a bunch of video as well on a single battery, and still had like 15% battery life left. If you do need more, there is a battery grip that will allow you to put extras in there. Overall, it seems like Sony is really playing the game to get this camera up to the standards of the Canon 5D Mark IV or Nikon D810. It's not going to be the kind of battery life that you get from those 1DX and Nikon D5s, though, without adding the battery grip, but that is an option to do. We did retain the same 5-axis image stabilization system. It seems to be a little bit more effective. Sony's claiming 5 stops. We'll have to see a little bit more on that one, but it does seem to be a little bit better. Sony is definitely hanging their hat on that. The smaller is going to be a better format for most of these shooters, and in a little way, I agree with them. The Canon 1DX and Nikon D5s for a lot of situations are just really bulky and heavy, and a lot of people have been switching to smaller, lighter cameras depending on the type of shooting you're doing. I do think this body style is still a little bit cramped, especially when you're using those larger lenses. There's just not a lot of room on the finger grip, and some of these larger lenses are going to be really front heavy for these systems, and I do wish that they had made it a little bit more like the Sony A9 too, which I thought the implementation of that was really good. Ergonomics were solid on that camera. The flip out screen was one of the best implementations I saw on that one, but unfortunately we have more of this A7R II style body, and there are some negatives to that, but if you're looking for a smaller, lighter camera and really don't mind pushing the limits on that side, it might be something that you're okay with. Also, to better compete with those cameras, we now have a LAN port for tethered shooting. In addition to your typical wireless options, we have Wi-Fi, NFC, Bluetooth, so we have all of the kind of connectivity options that you could hope for on this thing. Now let's talk weather sealing. This is not going to be a 1DX style camera, and you do have more magnesium alloy in the body itself, but I saw some places that were missing O-rings that probably should have had them, and I do not think that this camera is going to have the water resistance, and also if you're shooting in the cold environments as well, I don't think it'll have that kind of weather resistance that we're used to in those cameras. Now the Sony A9 does have a brand new viewfinder, 3.9 million dots. It is a joy to use, crystal clear when you're looking through it. It's awesome being able to review your images immediately after you take it. There's 0 blackout when you're shooting with the electronic shutter in this, 20 frames per second. It really almost feels like a video camera when you're looking through that, and it was a little bit weird at first, but after shooting with a camera for about 8 hours and going back to a DSLR, it really felt different going back to the DSLR, and I really missed having that electronic shutter. Now to drive this technology, this is where Sony's new stacked CMOS sensor, which is the first ever for a large format camera, is paying off. We're getting 20 times faster readouts, which is allowing us to have no compromises virtually with the electronic shutter compared to the standard mechanical shutter. You still have your mechanical shutter for good measure, but you're going to be stuck to 5 frames per second shooting, and you will actually need that mechanical shutter if you're shooting with strobes because it won't work with the electronic shutter. But you're going to have those sounds. But switch on over to the electronic shutter, 1/32,000th of a second shutter speeds max in the electronic shutter. You're also going to get that 20 frames per second with 0 blackout, and it's really an amazing system to use. It is clear that Sony with this camera is not only making the mirror obsolete, but also the shutter, and I really think this is the beginning of something new. I didn't notice any noticeable rolling shutter or image artifacts or anything like that that would make me want to shoot with a mechanical shutter. Overall, from what I was shooting, the results seemed amazing, and I think that this might be the future, is shooting electronic shutter only, if these are the kind of readouts that we can expect. Now, while this camera clearly isn't designed for videography use, it is a very capable camera. We do have 4K at up to 30 frames per second, just like the A7R II, 1080p at 120 frames per second. We are missing picture profile, so no S-Log3. So there are some limitations when it comes to video, but overall things are very, very good looking and very detailed. We are getting a 2.4x oversampling of the sensor, which is enabling some really, really detailed images. Low light performance also seemed very good in video. Seems like a great camera, and also because of those high read speeds, we're not getting the rolling shutter that I'm used to on full frame cameras. It's still there, it's just not to the degree, and it's probably the best full frame camera that you can use that's not a global shutter. All right, let's talk image quality for a second. I do not have raw ability, so we're judging this right now on the JPEGs, but overall I can say things look amazing. It is very good. I don't think this is setting a new bar for image quality. It seems to be more of the performance that we're used to. It's a 24 megapixel sensor, so we're losing some resolution from the A7R II, and with that, some quality loss, but it's still more than what you're getting from the Nikon D5 and 1DX. So if we're comparing it to those, you're getting a little bit more detail. Noise performance seems very good as well. On the JPEG files, at least, I was happy at about 12,000 ISO, which is very similar to what I find the performance to be on those cameras. Again, when we get the camera in and RAW support is supported, we'll do a more detailed review on that image quality. But for now, things look very good. And again, you can download these images to see for yourself. I really think that this is going to be a comparable camera to those systems for the image quality. Now, from an autofocus perspective, 693 points covering 93% of the frame. I think this is a game changer in so many ways. This camera was able to track subjects going all the way to the extent of the frame, and then also when they re-enter the frame, it's still glued right on them. I've never seen a camera track a subject moving across the frame as well as the Sony A9. Also, eye autofocus is now improved as well for tracking, and I really think this is probably the first time that we're able to use this for portrait use. And so no matter what you're shooting, the autofocus system seemed vastly improved. There were a couple times that it seemed to be just behind the subject when shooting kind of erratic behavior like the ice hockey, but overall tracking seemed amazingly good, and almost every file I would say was a keeper. I would say the big question is, who is this camera for? The Sony A9 is marketed a little bit more towards your sports photographers, as well as maybe wildlife and documentary style. They brought in some White House photographers and were showing how they might shoot events differently with a silent shutter. However, there are some weaknesses with the system. Lens-wise, we do not have anything f2.8 above 200 millimeters, and if you want anything more than that, you only have two options. You can go with a teleconverter, or they just put out that brand new 100-400 millimeter lens. It goes to f5.6, f4.5 to 5.6, I believe it is, up to that 400 millimeters, but that's a little bit more limited than what most sports photographers are used to shooting with Canon and Nikon. Now, this was also marketed towards event shooters, but also towards documentary and wildlife shooters. And again, wildlife is going to have some issues with those longer lenses, but if you're okay with the range that we have, I think it might be a very capable camera. Also for documentary shooters as well, having the silent shutter could be amazing. You have all the lenses that you need in a small body and all the features you need with the dual card slots, silent shooting at 20 frames per second. I really think that this might be an industry that a lot of people are going to look at. Overall, I will be honest with you, this is not quite the Sony A9 that I was hoping for. The body being more similar to the Sony A7R Mark II is a little bit smaller than I would like to see from these kind of professional cameras. I do wish it was a little bit more like the A99, which I find to be an extremely ergonomically sound camera. That said, this is a camera that we have. I do see a lot of uses for this camera in a lot of places where this might be an amazing system. Price-wise, at $40,500, this is definitely not a cheap camera, especially if you're coming from cameras like the 5D Mark IV, Nikon D810. This is a considerable step up. It's a step down for your 1DXs, might be a little bit cheaper for that, but that's such a niche market. It will be very difficult for Sony to compete with many of them, especially without those lens systems. So if you can afford the system, I do think it's something that you need to try. For me, the silent shooting, the frame rates, a lot of the abilities of the camera allowed me to do things that I wasn't able to do on other cameras, and I do see that being an advantage. Plus, the autofocus tracking system is really probably one of the best on the market today and really sets a new standard, especially for tracking across a frame and having that unbelievable frame coverage. So it is a camera I would highly recommend and trying out. I do think that Sony has some room to grow on the lens side of things before it's ever going to be a serious contender in your sports market. Let's just say, though, that this is probably the beginning of the end for DSLRs. And here's why I say that. Because not only has Sony made the mirror obsolete, but also the shutter mechanism. And this is something that DSLRs will never be able to deliver. With some lenses and probably some refinements on the camera body, this is going to be the beginning of the end for those professional, large format DSLRs. And again, Sony can create a larger version of this if they really wanted to, but I do think that this is a solid head start for Sony. And again, don't just take my word for it. Check out the links below. All the JPEG files, large resolution files you can download. Stay tuned for more on this one when I get the raw files and take this to the next level and we get a little bit more hands-on time with it. It'll be awesome. A lot of other videos related to this camera you can check out in the link above, and I do appreciate your support by clicking on those links in the bottom when you're making your purchases. So again, thanks a lot for watching. Like, subscribe, stay tuned, a whole lot more to come.